Hi, this is Eternal King bringing you another LOR video today. So, believe it or not, we are back in Legends of Runeterra, and that's because recently a lot more attention has been shifting to the Eternal meta. Specifically, Sunny released a very powerful deck, my Azir Aurelia list, essentially, with Emperor's Army. He released a video highlighting that, and that did really well, and it basically got people re-interested in the extended card format that is Eternal. When people get interested in a format, they tend to brew more, and that's what we're seeing, is that basically an influx of new decks that are doing very well. Previously, I had talked about how Noxus was very strong, and so we talked about all the aggro decks that you can run, all the Noxus control decks that you can run. But even in addition to that, we've seen a lot of different other archetypes take off to either be competitive in the Eddy meta or counter the Eddy meta, Eddy Matron specifically. So I've actually prepped all these decks beforehand for us to look at that I think are worth talking about. First up, it is going to be Nocturne Control. So again, Nocturne Control with Vex, or Nocturne Midrange more accurately with Vex. Not something that you would typically see anywhere at all. I would call this a new deck construction, using things like the Sentinels, along with a lot of pings. So you have Sentinel on 1, Sentinel on 3, they get stronger when you kill a unit with a spell. So then you have Quietus on 1, Glare on 2, Mystic Shot, and Soul Harvest. So again, very comprehensive 10 or 11 or 12, ping options in your deck. And then your more standard aggro fare, Stygian Onlooker is a staple card for Nocturne. I don't think you ever not use this in a Nocturne deck. Phantom Butler is interesting. It's just like a non-conditional, 3/1 Fearsome that also will buff your other creatures on swing. So I think that makes sense in a Nocturne deck. There's no reason not to use it. And then Doom Beast is just a universally good Shadow Isles card. Obviously has a similar effect to Mystic Shot where you're just draining damage from the opponent's Nexus. Moonlit Glenkeeper is very good. When you activate Nightfall, it will summon, talking about that mid-range kind of control-y style of play, you'll get the Sapling and you can drag something and kill it for free. Very good. Very, very good. Vex on 4, and then you probably slow roll the Nocturne with the auto level up. Grim, of course, staple Vex card. It's just a good card altogether, and then Harrowing to bring it all back again. So it's basically, instead of Nocturne Fearsome Aggro, which is what you typically see out of this deck, it's more of a comprehensive mid-range Nocturne Vex package with a 6 mana top end. In terms of a creature, you don't usually see that. So that is a new deck, 100%, and it is winning 56% of games. And that's why I'm including it in this video, which I'm going to call Let Them Cook. So this is a new deck, absolutely. Talking about other interesting shifts beyond Noxus just doing well universally across the board, we also have a lot of other decks that are either seeing a revival or are essentially, performing better than you think they would. So in this case, we have competitive Sundisk. You would never think to see a Sundisk deck in Eternal winning 58% of games, but that is literally what is happening right now. And it's doing so with Renekton and Glory's Call. So typically, if you don't know, the Sundisk decks that use Renekton instead of Xerath, they are less interested in flipping Sundisk and more interested in just winning with value over a period of time, right? You have like alternate win conditions thanks to Renekton. So obviously, Exhaust, staple Renekton card lets you drag things. Ancient Prep, again, it's just a good one mana card that predicts and helps fix your hand state. Forsaken Bakai helps fix your draws as well. It's a good staple 1 mana card. Shaped Stone to allow your Renekton to essentially survive and push more damage. All-Terrain Trooper is going to allow you to drag things with your Renekton. And then Avenging Bestia, that's very interesting. I think this is the coolest tech in the list. And it is, running these sorts of transform cards, Shadow in the Bush, and flipping them, in this case, to get a counterspell. So you're basically running 3 counterspells in this, Sundisk deck. very interesting, right? Everything about this list is unconventional and compelling. Quicksands, Rock Bear Shepherd, Golden Ambassador, but then, yeah, Glory's Call. So even if Sun Disk gets destroyed and does not flip, you will still get Sun Disk cards out of Glory's Call on 5. So this deck is the kind of the main one that I wanted to mention. It is more interesting than any other list that's come out of Eternal because Sun Disk traditionally has only won 46% of games. And so going, it's like 48% of games, sorry, like 50-50 kind of thing. The old Zerath lists typically win 50-50 when it comes to the combo all-in Sun Disk style of play. The fact that this Sun Disk deck is winning 58% of games and is highly competitive using Renekton and Glory's Call is insane. This is perhaps one of the most intelligent decks that I have seen built in a long time. So kudos to the person that built this. It was not me. And if you are in fact the person that built that Sun Disk deck, give a shout out in the comments. A couple other things to highlight. A little less spectacular in terms of like 2 brand new lists that have not existed before. It is old lists that are coming back and overperforming. So in this case, Trundle Set. The reason why I like this deck is because it's running the Old Timer as a 3 of, not something you would see very often. So obviously Buried in Ice, Hit That Stares, these are amazing Freljord cards that you should run in all your ramp lists along with Feel the Rush, She Who Wanders. This is all pretty staple stuff. Trundle and Set are amazing cards. Place Your Bets is amazing draw and, good for Set. Harsh Winds to slow down your opponent and then, ramp, healing, AoE, ramp, etc. But the fact that this deck, this, Freljord Ionia ramp list is winning 62% of games is insane. That is doing very, very well. And if I had to guess why this deck is doing so well, it is the kind of odd inclusion of the Old Timer, essentially allowing you to bounce the opponent's entire board. That's very, very good. Moving on, we also have Lee Sin. So typically if Lee Sin is overperforming, that's a rarity. So I wanted to highlight that. Lee Sin typically being a 50-50 kind of deck. And now this particular Lee Sin list that is including odd cards like Siphoning Strike is winning. It's okay with Akshan. Like I guess it makes sense with the Akshan to have Siphoning Strike. Along with, your grappling hooks and your absolvers. So it really seems like more of a Akshan list with the slow roll Lee Sin, which is probably the way you want to do it. But I was basically think that this is a good deck. 55% Lee Sin deck. That's overperforming for what Lee Sin does. If there was a Rise list that someone could build that was winning 55% of games, I would highlight that because typically Rise is a 50-50 deck. And the same thing is true of Lee Sin in Eternal. Typically does not win this much. The last thing I wanted to mention on the Cook spectrum of Eternal that's happening right now, I didn't want to show off any lists because it's not interesting enough to talk about, but Seraphine's coming back in a big way. There's 3 competitive Seraphine decks right now in Eternal, so that's kind of the old school Majin Bay style of deck building. He was a big fan of Seraphine, basically just infinite value grinding machine with leveled Seraphine giving you that infinite value in the late game, right? Just cycle. Everything cycles, everything's infinite value, you keep cycling, you keep casting spells until you eventually stumble upon your win condition. And there's different variations of that deck, but it's coming back in a big way. Sometimes it's Ezreal, Karma, whatever it is you want to do. So, talking about, where I'm landing on Eternal for this season in particular, overall I'm pretty happy, I think that Eternal is a great format. It is the penultimate format of LOR. There is no format in LOR that is as competitive or well designed as Eternal because it's basically just LOR vanilla. It's just here's all of the LOR cards and all the LOR sets and anything that you could possibly think of. Go ahead, put it in a deck, do what you can. And that's Eternal, and it's always been what Eternal was. And, while we have in the past had some trouble dealing with specifically Eddie Matron, right? So Eddie with Spectral Matron basically pulling out a free 10 drop. this was more or less format crushing for a very long time. As far as I can tell, people are finally starting to move away from that. Like, I think finally after 3 seasons, we can we can say that yes, Spectral Matron is a good card when paired with Eddie. I think we can all acknowledge that that is the case. We can move on from that and actually play Eternal like it's a real card game, a real format in a card game, and that's what we're seeing now. And I just wanted to highlight that because it is an excellent thing. With a card game that is this old, you don't expect to see a Sundisk deck break out of the odds and start winning 58% of games. Sure, it's not going to be as good as something like, potentially like a Ziggs Poppy or a Noxus-based deck or an Eddie-based deck. Like, it's not going to be quite as competitive, but the fact that it's this competitive, like, it's still winning way. You can climb with this no problem. Like, 58% is a really respectable win rate. The fact that you have a Renekton deck in LOR Eternal, fighting alongside the likes of a Spectral Matron Eddie shell, and obviously not being quite as good, but being good enough, is amazing, right? Like, that's amazing. What else is going to come out of the woodwork? Are we going to see a competitive elites deck with Garen that's just like going to come out and blow up Eternal all of a sudden? Like, who knows, right? It's wide open. This is what happens when you kind of reject the competitive mindset of LOR and just do your own thing. I had done that a long time ago, and in fact, you can go look at my videos on the last set when it released. Basically story cards, right? So like when I did a lot of videos on story cards when they first released, and I had said that they had the potential to be exceptionally powerful. And as soon as I said that, we started seeing things like the Wings Giving taking off. Obviously, the Emperor's Army is one of the most competitive cards in Eternal in my deck. And, then there are other people who will mess around with Family Reunion. There are people who will mess around with Iron Conquest. Like, the point is that these cards were, in fact, good. Right? And every single person who said that they weren't was basically wrong. They're just, it's amazing how limiting the mindset of LOR can be if you play it from the perspective that things have to be done a certain way. That's not true. So, like, all of our notions about the way that LOR gets played, in Eternal specifically, if you're a Standard player coming to Eternal, you're basically wrong. Like, you should never talk about the game ever. If you're coming from Standard and you're going into Eternal and you're making certain assumptions about certain archetypes, you are inherently wrong about those assumptions. You cannot say anymore that Sundisk is a bad card or an uncompetitive card. And if you want to say, it's a lot like a very long story. It's like a 20-turn story, right? You can't say that Sundisk is objectively a bad card anymore if you're a Standard player coming to Eternal. You can't objectively say anymore that Freljord Ramp without Eddie is strictly worse than Freljord Ramp with Eddie. You can't say that anymore because just Trundle Set is winning more than the Freljord Eddie ramp shells. You can't say that anymore. You can't say that Akshan Lee Sin is not a competitive deck in Eternal anymore because it's winning 55% of games. So all of these assumptions you have about the game are basically wrong if you're a competitive player coming into the game right now. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So I'm going to call this video Let Them Cook, and I just want to see more cooking. Just like, give me my 55% Rise deck. Give me, a low-played champion that is going to be, good again, like Tarek. Where's my super competitive, Tarek Poppy deck running, Veiled Blessings or something? Like, there's so much stuff in this game that if you simply reject the notion of what is or is not competitive, then you can just play what you want when you want. And Tarek Poppy's not a bad deck by any means. Not at all. So this is going to be it for me on this video. Really optimistic about the future state of LOR and the Eternal competitive scene, despite the fact that Eternal is basically going unpatched by the devs, unnoticed by the devs, and essentially no new expansions from the devs. Like, it's going entirely ignored by the devs, but the community is basically eating up Eternal right now. And this is being shown off with these new deck constructions. That's it for me today. This is Eternal King, signing out.